Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Herp Monday number 37 and we have an important one for you today. I'm not going to say it's good as I don't particularly like this thing, but it is very important and there are thousands upon thousands of people who do like this herp. Today we are going to be talking about the African clawed frog. So African clawed frog, or scientific name Xenopus laevis. Again, that is Xenopus laevis. It is part of the family Pipidae. So Pipidae is a group of frogs. They are all very highly aquatic. They are very primitive, and this is just all of the Pipidae frogs. All of the Pipidaes lack a tongue or vocal cords, and almost all of them use bones in their larynx to produce sound. Now, in regards to the African clawed frog, this one is fully aquatic. It is native to wetlands, ponds, and lakes across the semi-arid regions of sub-Saharan Africa. Who would have guessed? These rarely leave water, but they will leave water to migrate to new water bodies, especially if there's a severe drought. But in other cases of drought, they will actually estivate by burying themselves in the mud. And they can live in the mud for about up to a year, but sometimes they just migrate to a different water body. Now, this is a medium-sized frog. It's not a particularly large frog, and they are going to range somewhere between 2 and 2 inches to a little over 5 inches, which that's about 5 to 13 centimeters. And as you can tell from this picture, they have really powerful legs that help them swim. Really powerful legs, and that's actually what helps them get across the land whenever they migrate as well. Now, there are 3 black claws on the last 3 digits of both the front feet and the back feet. It's hard to see on this one. You can see the claws here, and you can see the claw here. And in this picture, you cannot see them here, but you can see a claw there. That is actually where they got their name, obviously. Those claws, they are used to rip apart their food and to scratch predators whenever they are threatened. Just a little fun fact about these, not necessarily it's definitely a gross fact. These shed their skin every season, but then eat it. These do not live in very nutrient-rich environments, and so they have evolved to really be efficient at finding nutrients wherever they can, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But speaking of their skin, it's extremely smooth and covered in a really mucus layer, really thick mucus layer. But talking about their feet, only the back feet are webbed. As you can see in this picture and in this picture right here, which is why I chose this picture, the front feet are not webbed. This frog is very often confused with the African dwarf frog, which is another aquatic frog. And the African dwarf frog, both feet are webbed. And there's some other morphological differences, but that's the easiest one to say. Obviously, the dwarf frog is significantly smaller as well. As you can tell from these pictures, they are kind of multicolored with blotches, stripes, whatever you want to call them. However, albinos are extremely common in the pet trade and for medical research. The albinos are found almost more often than regular colors are. It's kind of crazy. If you want to tell the difference between a male frog and a female frog, it's really hard just seeing them individually. But if you have them side by side, male frogs are significantly smaller and much slimmer, whereas the females are much larger and much more rounded than the males, especially right in front of their pelvis, which is where their eggs are during reproductive times. Males also have black patches on their legs, specifically on their front ones. These are called nuptial pads, and those are actually used to help them hold on to females during reproduction. As you can imagine, with the mucus layer, these frogs are very slick, very hard to hold on to, so those pads are just ways for them to hold on to the females. But in regards to their reproduction, they actually have an interesting strategy. The males will make a reproductive call, and the female will either answer back with an "I'm interested" call, or it will answer back with a "not interested" call. If they are interested, then the male will go into what is called apoplexis, which is where he grabs onto the female. And the female actually doesn't push the eggs out. The male squeezes right behind their pelvis. The male will actually squeeze the eggs out of the female. If you've ever seen fish stripping, where they strip the eggs out of salmon or trout or other fish species, that's basically what this frog is doing. So, now in terms of their diet, this is just why these are not my favorite animal. They eat anything, and I mean anything. It's crazy. It doesn't matter if it's alive. It doesn't matter if this is dead. The comment or the title of this picture was, "This owner put this frog in with a carp, thinking that the carp and the frog would be friends, and then you wake up and this frog is eating it." I personally had this happen in my aquarium. My wife wanted an African clawed frog, and it choked to death after eating an inordinate amount of my fish in the aquarium. But as I said earlier, they use their claws to rip and shred their food. If they can't rip it and shred it, they still don't care. They just keep shoving the food in their mouth with their feet. These things can get just way too full, which is why there are very often instances where the clawed frogs bloat. Too much food and they're just not digesting. Very often they choke to death. But when I see anything, I mean fish, crustaceans, worms, crawfish, other frogs, tadpoles. In fact, there's been numerous studies that these frogs are really particularly cannibalistic. There was a study done where the stomach contents of feral clawed frogs in California, which we'll get into in a little bit, they have revealed very large amounts of the frog's larvae. The clawed frog larvae or tadpoles, they're filter feeders, and they collect nutrients from plankton. And it actually seems to be that sometimes these frogs reproduce just so the tadpoles will gather a whole bunch of plankton, start digesting the plankton, and then the olts just come through and eat it. I mean, it's a cannibalistic nature and doesn't seem like it worked, but this is what actually allows these clawed frogs to survive in areas that have basically no other food sources. Kind of interests that these things are really good at conserving energy. If it isn't eating or reproducing, it isn't moving. It just sits there. It's the most boring thing to watch, and I can't believe my wife loved this frog. In terms of finding their food, they use their sense of smell, and they have a lateral line. Which a lateral line is a line that's much more common in fish, and not many herps have these. That lateral line is a pressure sensing organ, basically. Not really organs, but a pressure sensing thing, so they can detect when things are moving throughout the water. That's not to say that they don't use their eyes, but they can definitely use their eyes, but they're more predominantly going to be smell and using that lateral line. If you couldn't tell from before, these can get very highly invasive. You're talking about basically an apex predator. It'll eat anything that it can, meaning if these things get out, they usually cause a pretty big dent in local ecosystems. But now, the fun fact that we're going to end the video on. This frog, for all of its faults, is incredibly important for medical and genetic research. The list of what this frog has been involved in terms of studies and medical research. Goes on and on, but I just picked 2 of what I think are the most common. I highly suggest you go research and see what clawed frogs, not just the African clawed frog, but the other species in its genus, what they have done medically on them. Like I said, I just picked 2, but there's numerous others. So, real quick, the first vertebrate ever to be cloned was an African clawed frog in 1962. We haven't talked, but there's, you've seen all the news articles, scientists trying to clone animals. Well, the first vertebrate that was successfully cloned was the African clawed frog. But something else that's super interesting, the African clawed frog is really notable for its use in the first widely used method of pregnancy testing. In the 1930s, 2 South African researchers, Halil Shapiro and Harry Zwarenstein, I think, they were students at the University of Cape Town, and they discovered that the urine from pregnant women would induce a certain, it would produce a oocyte production. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but they basically induce something that in the body that that was abnormal, and that was within 8 to 12 hours of injection. And this was so incredibly consistent and reliable that this was used up until, I believe, the 1960s for reliable pregnancy tests. They would send off the blood, and basically the blood would be injected into a female African clawed frog. So really interesting, I thought. But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. I hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you do, I'd really appreciate it. And I hope to see you again. And peace.